Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of A Practical Guide to the Tower. In today's episode, we are going to be doing something different. We are no longer going to be talking about economy, and in fact we are going to be talking about the other ultimate weapons that we have not covered so far. The purpose of this video is to give the viewer an understanding of the main purposes that we use each ultimate weapon for, and the pros and cons of each ultimate weapon. At the end of the day, our tower is going to be dependent on a synergy between all our ultimate weapons, and so just focusing on one or two might not necessarily give you the desired result that you would like. So my goal is to help you understand when you might need to use certain ultimate weapons in developing your tower, and also when you should be progressing certain ultimate weapons in your tower career. So let's get into it. Before I begin, please, if you haven't already, do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers in this channel, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so let's get into the actual content of this video, and we will start off by looking at Chain Lightning. Now, to provide some context, the stage of progression that I'm currently at in this game is that I'm farming tier 14, and I can get to about wave 6.4k in tier 14, drawing in about 9.64 Q per run, and my highest wave completed is tier 18, 2506. I should have been able to get slightly further than this because I was having no issues at that moment, but since I'm sure that I would not have hit 4500 in tier 18, I decided to end the run then. So I guess from a practical perspective, what you guys would be able to infer is how much damage is required in order to be at somewhere at my level. And so let's begin with Chain Lightning. So at base level, Chain Lightning is doing about 2 times damage, 1 quantity and 5 chance. At max level, the damage multiplier goes up to 7.9k, quantity of 5 and chance of 27.5%. Where I'm at, I'm currently sitting at about 898 times of my multiplier. So with the perk in-game, it gets me up to about 1.8k multiplier. I run with 4 quantity and a chance of 17%. Now, let's first understand the purposes of Chain Lightning. So the primary purpose of Chain Lightning is to spread this thing called the shock multiplier. So if I click on my Chain Lightning over here, you can see that chance of Chain Lightning applying shock on struck enemies, and this amplifies all damage received by the enemy. This chance is given by a lab, so you can increase the lab chance by upgrading your lab, and the shock gives a 1.66 multiplier to my damage, and this stacks up, I think up to 10 times if I remember correctly, if we are using this module, which is the Dimension Core. So okay, Chain Lightning has a 60% chance of hitting the initial target. Shock chance and multiplier is doubled. If a shock is applied again on the same enemy, the shock multiplier will add up to a max stack of 20 times. Okay, so that is the purpose of shock. It's mainly there to increase the amount of damage that the enemy gets from other sources. Now, additionally, Chain Lightning is really good at dealing with the armored battle conditions and also dealing with scatter enemies. So how the armor battle condition works is your enemies require a certain number of hits before they start taking damage. And with Chain Lightning, because it branches out into 4 chains, it is going to hit each enemy, I guess, 4 times because of the 4 chains, and that's going to take off their armor stacks very quickly. So for tournaments where there has been some armored battle condition, just rolling extra Chain Lightning quantity on your Dimension Core is going to greatly improve your ability to deal with the armored battle condition. Now, in addition to that, the Chain Lightning has a lab which allows you to amplify the damage done to scatter enemies, especially for players in the mid game who are running Devo strategies. You are going to at some point run into the issue of scatter enemies. When they split, their babies are just going to take your wall down and you are going to die from that. So having Chain Lightning is going to help you deal with the scatter enemies very easily. I would say though that the lab on Chain Lightning amplification for scatters is going to be quite long, but the nice thing is you don't actually have to max out the lab. I think my lab is currently sitting at level, I believe it's level 11, let's check. Yeah, so my lightning amplifier is at level 10 currently, and at least where I'm at in this game, I am not facing an issue with scatter enemies. So what you could do from a practical perspective is, at some point if you do have issues with scatter enemies, then level up the lab a couple of times, and what you would notice then is the scatter enemies, they will die very quickly. Like look at this, they just die very quickly when they enter my tower range. And if you find that you at a particular level are able to clear off these scatter enemies very easily, then hold off on upgrading it further until you run into that same issue again. Now, in terms of the pros and cons of Chain Lightning, the main pro is that it is very cheap to upgrade. It also provides very good damage, and the lab requirements are very low for Chain Lightning, in the sense that there are not many labs that you need to work on. Now, the primary con of Chain Lightning is also one of its pros, is that because it is so cheap to upgrade, players in the early game often find it very easy to overdevelop Chain Lightning. And let me explain what I mean by overdevelopment of Chain Lightning. So at some point, when you are at somewhere at my level, the damage that Chain Lightning does on bosses is not very significant. As you can see, it's doing 3.3% of the boss's health. My Smart Missiles is doing 32%. So investing all your stones into Chain Lightning, just understand that at some point it's going to result in a big fall off in terms of its benefit to your overall gameplay. Instead, what you at the later stages of the game, where the damage from Chain Lightning comes from is from its Ultimate Weapon Plus version. But I'm not going to be covering Ultimate Weapon Plus stuff in this particular video. So just remember that at some point, all of this development which you put into your Chain Lightning, if you overdevelop it, it's going to fall off in terms of its benefit to your overall gameplay later on in the game. The second con of Chain Lightning is that there's no priority damage, because what it does is it just spreads out tickle kind of damage to all the enemies, and as a result of that, the ability for you to take down priority targets such as the boss enemies with your Chain Lightning is going to be relatively muted. Right, on to the next ultimate weapon, it's Smart Missiles. Again, at base level, it's relatively lackluster. At where I'm at, my Smart Missile damage multiplier is at 502 times, with a quantity of 11 and a cooldown of 20 seconds. At max level, I can upgrade this to a multiplier of about 3000 times and a quantity of 20. So Smart Missile is the opposite of Chain Lightning in terms of what it does. While Chain Lightning provides blanket damage to enemies overall in general, the Smart Missiles is going to provide burst damage to priority targets. And this means that it excels in dealing with bosses, elites, and protectors. Now, with Smart Missiles, you can actually use this in your farming runs when you are running an Obless Devil strategy. And the way this works is you want to get your Smart Missiles to be the same cooldown as your Black Hole, Death Wave, and Golden Tower. So if your Black Hole is at 50 seconds, you can even choose to bring your Smart Missiles down to 50 seconds as well. And what you can then do is at the start of the run, toggle your Smart Missile off and wait for 1 or 2 seconds and then toggle it on again. Now what this is going to do is, well, suppose you're running a devil strategy, you can imagine on your screen that all the enemies will be crowded around your tower. So at some point when your ultimate weapons activate, they are going to be pulled away from your tower by your black hole towards the center of the black hole. Then from there, when your Smart Missiles activate, they are going to launch into the enemies, and you are going to be able to benefit from all the coin bonuses during your ultimate weapon activation windows. And most of the time, it's going to clear off all the enemies in that activation itself. So because of this, it's actually very easy to sync your Smart Missiles together with your other 3 Econ ultimate weapons, and that allows you to, I guess, be more efficient at farming. At some point, I guess in the very early stages of the game, everyone runs into the issues of protectors because of how good Smart Missiles is in targeting priority targets. It is a very simple answer for dealing with protectors. Now, in terms of the pros and cons, Smart Missiles synergizes very well with Chain Lightning Shock, because Chain Lightning Shock amplifies the damage that the enemy receives from other sources, and because Chain Lightning does not provide the bursty damage that Smart Missiles provides, Smart Missiles is going to complement that ultimate weapon very well. The primary con of Smart Missiles is that it runs on a cooldown, which means that if there is a priority enemy that is around, but my Smart Missiles is on cooldown, I am not dealing any damage to the enemy. And potentially, that would allow for rays to shoot me or bosses to hit me and potentially kill me. So in that sense, its damage is relatively inconsistent. The next thing to note is that the lab requirements for Smart Missiles, if we have a look over here. So there are quite a few for Smart Missiles. Missile Explosion is good. Missile Radius is very, very good. And Missile Amplifier is what makes Smart Missiles really shine. So try to get this unlocked as quickly as possible. And the larger your radius is, the more enemies you hit with your Smart Missile, and Missile Amplifier gives each missile a 38.5 times damage multiplier increase additively from its previous activation. Now, in addition to that, if you have Spotlight, then Spotlight Missiles is also a good avenue because it's going to be passive damage from your tower. Every 2 seconds, your tower is going to fire a Spotlight Missile that deals the same damage as a Smart Missile. So to distinguish the two activations in-game, where you see bright green circles, that is coming from the smart missiles itself, and where you see the blue circles, that is coming from the the spotlight missiles. Now, the other con of smart missiles is that compared to chain lightning, it is relatively more pricey in terms of its stone requirements. So one of the mistakes that I made earlier on in my game was that I wanted to level my chain lightning and my smart missiles together to the point where the damage that the damage cost for stones were identical. So what ended up happening is that with my smart missiles, I managed to get the multiplier up to 502 times. At this stage, the stone cost was exactly the same as chain lightning for the next level of upgrade, and for chain lightning that brought me to about 800 times multiplier. Now, an issue with doing a strategy like this is that during my farming runs, I don't really want to kill the enemies too quickly, and I'll touch more on this later on, but during your farming runs, you don't really want to kill enemies too quickly. And so between smart missiles and chain lightning, if I had to choose which ultimate weapon to switch on first, I would switch on my smart missiles. And at some point when my smart missiles are unable to kill the enemies, I now have to rely on the additional amplification from shock from my chain lightning. But because my chain lightning is dealing double the damage of my smart missiles, as we can see, plus the ×2 bonus perk, it makes it about 4 times more powerful than my smart missiles. So I run into a situation whereby my smart missiles alone are unable to kill the enemies, and when I turn on my chain lightning just wipes all the enemies out of my game, right? And as a result of that, I ended up losing coin per minute in the middle part of my runs. So that is just one of the factors to bear in mind regarding the cost of stone investments. Alright, onwards we go now to Poison Swamp. And Poison Swamp is at base level 10 times damage, 30 seconds duration, 125 seconds cooldown. Where I'm currently sitting, I'm sitting at 200 times damage, 75 seconds duration, and 60 seconds cooldown. At max level, Poison Swamp is going to do 3000 times damage, 100 seconds duration, and 50 seconds cooldown. So let's talk about the purposes of Poison Swamp. Mainly, it's this big green circles that you can see on my screen. That is Poison Swamp. Now, Poison Swamp does great AoE damage, and it's very high AoE damage as well. So over the course of a run, even though my Poison Swamp is 300 times less in terms of its damage multiplier than my smart missiles, you can see that the damage between the two ultimate weapons are relatively similar. And so it's very, very good in terms of its AoE damage. Now, it is also great at crowd control for the enemies because it provides a slow of 25%, I think, on enemy speed, and it also provides a stun, which is one of the labs. So what that does is that it provides damage, and it also helps provide crowd control in slowing enemies from reaching your tower. Now, in terms of the pros of Chain Lightning, that's clearly one of the pros. In addition to that, it has great synergy with the Chain Lightning Shock, as we mentioned before, and it also does very, very good damage. So what are the cons of Poison Swamp? Well, number one, the lab requirements for Poison Swamp are also relatively high. It's about the same as Smart Missiles, and it requires typically Chrono Field Plus, which is the ultimate weapon plus of Chrono Field, in order for it to shine. And the reason for that is because Chrono Field Plus is the ultimate weapon that makes the enemies, instead of moving directly to my tower, it makes them spin around my tower. So what could potentially happen is, suppose a boss comes in, it's somewhere over here, it hits my poison swamp because of the rotation from Chrono Field, it gets stunned there, and I'm able to start dealing damage to the boss, and then after that the boss continues moving around the tower, and it hits into my second poison swamp, and it gets stunned again. And that allows me to significantly delay the time that the boss takes to reach my tower eventually. What that means is that I have more time to deal damage to the boss, more smart missile activations, more bullet damage, and so on and so forth. And that's how smart, I guess, Poison Swamp really shines in the later part of this game. So what else is a con? Well, I have not personally experienced this, but I was told that running Poison Swamp does result in an overall FPS fall in your gameplay, which could negatively affect your coin per minute generation. So now that we have covered the three major damage ultimate weapons, let's talk a little bit about damage economy trade-offs. So the first thing to understand is that typically when you focus on damage, it might result in a fall in coin per minute. And the reason for this is back to something that I mentioned previously, and the concept that we are interested in at this stage is that when we destroy an enemy, it matters much more than actually destroying the enemy. For instance, if we had very long cooldowns in our Black Hole GT and Death Wave, then we don't really want to kill the enemies when our ultimate weapons have not activated, because it results in less coin bonus. Instead, we want to try to kill as many enemies as we can when those ultimate weapons activate, so as to benefit from the coin bonuses. Now, if we focus a lot into our damage, what's going to happen is that because we are killing enemies too fast, it's going to result in less enemies being tagged by our ultimate weapons that generate coin, and as a result of that, we start suffering in terms of our coin generation. Secondly, it also means that if we were to focus on developing our ultimate weapons that deal damage, we are going to have to pull stones away from otherwise developing our economy ultimate weapons, and in turn that means that we have less focus on our economy, which harms our long-term coin per minute. Okay, so why is it bad that we actually have less focus on our economy? Well, in short, when we are developing our tower, if we have less coin generation from our economy, then it means that there is going to be less ability for us to upgrade our tower, which in turn translates into less damage. And since ultimate weapons deal a multiple of your base damage, having less base damage implies that you are going to have less ultimate weapon damage overall. Now, however, one could obviously make the case that if we focus on damage early on, then we are going to be able to rank better in our tournaments, and as a result of that, we can earn more stones. And that allows us to upgrade our ultimate weapons faster. Now, my suggestions, by the way, there is no right or wrong answer for this. It really depends on how you like to play the game. But what I would suggest, if I may, is to pick two of the ultimate weapons, and typically the choice would be definitely one would be Chain Lightning, and the other one you can either pick Poison Swamp or Smart Missiles depending on what you prefer. And try to develop these ultimate weapons evenly in terms of their damage multipliers. You don't want to be in a situation like where I'm at, where my Chain Lightning deals 4 times the damage of my Smart Missiles, simply because it does not result in good synergy between the two ultimate weapons. In my case, I can certainly get a lot more bang for my buck by investing into Smart Missile's damage as opposed to investing more into my Chain Lightning, simply because of the synergies between the ultimate weapons. So now, how should you go about developing these ultimate weapons then? Well, essentially our tower is a combination of all the upgrades that we put into it. So clearly focusing entirely into economy is not going to be a very good idea because we are going to be suffering in terms of our overall tournament performance. But neither is investing all into ultimate weapons all into damage going to be a good strategy, because we are going to be suffering very badly in terms of our economy, and at some point we are going to have to I guess pay the cost of it. So my suggestion would be to focus on, say, 2 weeks of economy in terms of your stones as well as your labs, and then switch to 1 week of damage in terms of your stones and your labs. And the reason for that is we don't really want to do a one-to-one kind of focus where 1 week economy and then 1 week damage, because typically our economy labs take a lot longer, so we need to actually devote a bit more time into developing the economy labs. But for our damage labs, let's say Chain Lightning labs, it's really quick to complete those labs, and so we can get pretty good bang for our buck just by investing 1 week's worth of stones and 1 week's worth of lab researches into our damage ultimate weapons. Right, so now that we have covered the damage ultimate weapons, then let's look at the ultimate weapons that we have for control. And I kind of started talking about this earlier on. So the first one I'm going to go through is Chrono Field. Now at base level, Chrono Field is probably the worst of all of our ultimate weapons. It has a duration of 5 seconds, 20% slow, and a cooldown of 180 seconds. Where I'm currently sitting, I'm sitting at 60 seconds of duration, 75% slow, and 60 seconds of cooldown, which means that my Chrono Field is permanent. Now at max level, Chrono Field can be upgraded up to 70 seconds of duration, and that is primarily used for the battle condition in tournaments that reduces the effectiveness of your ultimate weapons. So in particular, there is this very annoying battle condition that reduces up to 10 seconds of your Chrono Field duration. And so if you were to just be at, say, what I'm using currently, at 60 seconds of Chrono Field duration, I am going to, at some point, run out of Chrono Field duration, and that's when I'm going to take a big hit from the enemy. Now, what is the purpose of Chrono Field? Well, primarily, Chrono Field slows enemy speed, which means that we have more time to destroy the enemy. And if we are using orbs to, say, hit the bosses, that also means that we are able to hit the boss more with our orbs, and that translates into more boss damage for us. Now additionally, Chrono Field has this other lab, which is called I think Chrono Field reduction percentage. So if you are running an EHP build, this lab is pretty good in helping your survivability, but it does require that your Chrono Field is up in order for you to benefit from the reduction in damage taken. So what are the pros and cons of Chain Lightning then? Well, primarily it's going to be mandatory for Legends tournaments. For the most part in this game, we either have the enemy speed buff or fast ultimates, which buffs other enemies to fast enemy speed. And at Legends, the enemies are just going to zoom straight to your tower without Chrono Field. which means that if you do not have this when you first enter into Legends, and many players would definitely experience this. Typically when you are in Champions, you are using EHP builds to, I guess, tank the enemies, and then you can go pretty far with EHP, but then suddenly you get into Legends and you will notice that, well, suddenly my tournament performance drops from wave 1400 in Champions to less than 200 waves in Legends, and mainly it's because of an underdeveloped Chrono Field. It's not so much the damage per se, because we are actually able to use orbs and death ray to clear most of the basic enemies. We might take hits from the bosses, yes, that is true, so damage is still important in Legends, but oftentimes where players take a lot of chip damage is when the fast enemies start hitting the tower, or they're unable to juggle the enemies and so on. And Chrono Field will greatly help with that difficulty in the player's tower career. So it's, besides being mandatory for Legends, it's also mandatory for running a glass cannon build in the later stages of the game as of version 26, and that is because it significantly increases the amount of time that the boss needs to take in order to hit your tower. Now, so I guess even though it's such a good ultimate weapon, the major con of Chrono Field is that it has this really long lap. So it's called Chrono Field duration. This one over here. Now this lap has 30 levels in it, and it takes a very long time, especially if you are not running with high lap boost. So the reason why Chrono Field is so good is because it provides this permanent slow on enemies, but it is because of this that Chrono Field only really starts to shine if you get it to permanent status. If it is not permanent, this is essentially the same thing as what happens in your farming runs, where your black hole is not permanent and then suddenly black hole drops. All the enemies slingshot forward from the center of your black hole to your tower, and you take a big hit, very bursty damage on your tower, and potentially you might die. So because of that, Chrono Field is only really useful if it has that consistent slow that you can provide to the enemies, and that makes it a major con because it's not useful unless it is permanent. Now finally, our last ultimate weapon that we are considering is going to be Inner Landmines. And although Inner Landmines does do some damage, it's because it's typically rotating very close to your actual tower. Its primary focus is going to be used in crowd control for the boss in the form of stuns. Now at base level, it's got 10 times multiplier, 3 quantity, and 200 seconds of cooldown. My Inner Landmines are very underdeveloped. I've only put in 2 quantity into Inner Landmines. I still haven't maxed this out even though it's very cheap. But I have not touched my damage and I have not touched my cooldown at all. Now at max level, the damage multiplier goes up to 3000 times. It's got quantity of 6 and cooldown of 50 seconds. Now, as I mentioned, the primary purpose of Inner Landmines is in the stun that it provides when it hits an enemy, and in particular in a tournament run, realistically the only enemy that is going to be coming close to our tower is going to be the bosses, so its main purpose is for stunning the bosses. So what are the pros and cons of the Inner Landmine? As I mentioned, it's the ability to chain stun the bosses. As you might notice, when a boss comes into my tower range, because of how fast my orbs are hitting the boss, it's able to stun the boss multiple times before the boss actually gets to my tower. The main con is also its pro, and it's that in a tournament run, even if you are running max quantity of 6 inner landmines, it is not enough to chain stun the boss. And by chain stun, I mean that the orbs rotate fast enough such that just before the first stun ends, the next mine hits the boss, and so the boss gets stunned for a prolonged duration of time. And the reason why it's not able to chain stun the boss, well, not the reason why, the counter to that is to run the substat on your modules. Let's go to this, click on this. There is this substat that allows you to roll for extra inner landmine quantity, and if you have this quantity, then yes, you will be able to chain stun the boss. But without it, in a tournament, the bosses are typically moving too fast and they will hit your tower before you are fully able to chain stun them. So now here are my suggestions in terms of in terms of control ultimate weapons. For your Chrono Field, because of how long the Chrono Field duration lap is, I would suggest maxing your lap before you start sinking stones into Chrono Field. And the reason for that is because until you get that permanent uptime on your Chrono Field, it's probably not going to be too useful. And so rather than sinking the stones into your Chrono Field initially, where it provides no benefit, use those stones to upgrade other things like your economy, like your damage, and only when you are ready to I guess push into legends and you have a fully developed Chrono Field lab, that's when you start sinking the stones that you get into your Chrono Field to get it to permanent uptime. So I know I sound like a broken record by now, but because of how ineffective Chrono Field is, or how detrimental it is to your tower when it is not being activated, I would suggest focusing on duration and cooldown first, and getting your duration up to 60 seconds and your cooldown down to 60 seconds before you start working on the slow percentage. Of course, you can put in a couple of stones early on because it's relatively cheap, but if you face a choice between should I go for one extra level of slow or should I get my duration up or my cooldown down, I would suggest going for duration and cooldown instead of going for the slow, just to get the consistency of the slow. Now, the second thing to note is that Chrono Field's last lab is on Chrono Field range, this one over here. So this lab has 20 levels. I'm currently sitting at level 11. As you can see, this increases Chrono Field range beyond my tower range. Currently it's up to 30 meters. And so you can see in my tower that even though my orb line is over here, that's where my range line is, my Chrono Field extends out past that area. Now, this is good and bad. In tournaments, it's really good if the enemies are starting to be slowed further away from your range line, because that allows your tower more time to react. However, what's going to happen is that as you increase your Chrono Field range, your game is basically going to sort of zoom out. Very much similar to how when you increase your range in game, well, I'm going to be dead soon, so I can show it to you guys. So as I increase my range over here, okay, you can see that my tower sort of zooms out. Yeah, everything sort of becomes smaller. And what this does is that it's going to take a much longer time for enemies to travel to my range line. And because it takes a longer time for enemies to travel to my range line, typically what that results in is it's going to result in a fall in my overall economy. So depending on what you prefer, if you prefer a huge economy focus, then I would say go less levels into your Chrono Field range. But if you prefer a more competitive tournament performance, then I would suggest going more into your Chrono Field range lab. Currently, I put mine just in the middle because I cannot make up my mind for almost anything in life. So I thought just go in the middle and have the best of both worlds. Now, finally, for inner landmines, if you are going to be using inner mines in farming, like what I'm doing currently, then it's good to get your quantity up. Currently, it works fine for me with 5 quantity. I should get it done. I should get it to 6 quantity, but I really cannot be bothered with it. It works just fine for me currently. Now, in terms of the labs that you should be upgrading for inner landmines, get the stun lab unlocked as soon as possible, and then focus on the rotation lab. The rotation lab is what makes my inner landmines start moving in a circle around my tower. And only after that do we go into the radius of the inner landmines. As you can tell, I have not focused anything aside from 2 quantity into my inner landmines. And at this stage, my radius lab is still at 0, but it's working fine for me where I'm at currently. So as I would consider myself, I guess, somewhere in the later part of this game, and I still haven't worked on inner landmines, I guess this is a good indication of its usefulness. Not to say that it's not useful, but its usefulness and when you should actually be developing it. Ideally, we don't really want to see the boss come too close to our tower. We want to kill the boss way before it hits our tower. But in the event that we are unable to dish out enough damage, then inner landmines will provide us with the, I guess, that additional bit of control over the boss right before it hits us, or well, with the hopes that we are able to kill it, obviously. Right, so that is my overview of the other ultimate weapons and how you might want to consider them in part of your overall build for your tower. So for the most part, I think this would be quite useful because along the way, as you're up, I guess, pulling for new ultimate weapons, you may not always get the ultimate weapon that you like, but hopefully this gives you an overview of how you might want to go about selecting your ultimate weapons if you come across ultimate weapons that potentially you do not like. If you are an early game player, in terms of developing one ultimate weapon, it would be useful to just get one of the damage ultimate weapons unlocked and build on it a little bit as you focus on your economy primarily. And as you transition into the mid game, unlock a second damage ultimate weapon, or if you have it already unlocked, then proceed to develop it further to be in line with your first ultimate weapon. Overall, I think that would be a very decent strategy to get you towards the more progressed state in your tower. So I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, do consider subscribing if you haven't already. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye!